Hello, welcome back to WoodWorks. This week we're going to look at making a bench hook. Bench hook is primarily used for helping you make a saw cut square across your timber. It's not a hard project, it's quite straightforward, easy, and it's going to be an addition to your toolkit. Some of the timber we're going to use is something that you could probably pick up from scraps that you'll have around the workshop, and if you haven't, call into a local timber yard. They'll have odd scraps around that will probably be ideal for what you need. So what we're going to use is a couple of small pieces of 40mm by 30mm planed timber. So you can see 2 pieces there. They're only about 10 inches long and that's adequate. The last bench hook I made was slightly too small and it wasn't giving support on the right hand side of the cut. So I'm going to make this one slightly longer. And this is 18mm MDF and that's around about 18 inches long and about 8 inches wide. Like I say, you'll probably find some of these pieces available at a local timber yard. You might even have some kicking around in your workshop. Just have a little look, see what you can find. So the tools and materials you're going to require for doing this job are obviously going to be your timber stock. You're going to need 6 3.5 by 50mm wood screws. You're going to need steel rule, a 1/8 inch drill bit, countersink, with countersink in your holes, pencil, marking knife, a tri-square and a drill. That's all you're going to need to actually complete this project. In addition to that, 2 large spring clamps just to help hold it all together while you're assembling it would help. Not really necessary, you can do it by hand, but that would just make your life a lot easier. Now, I don't know if you recall from last week's video where I said about marking the ends of the timbers and taking the ends off square. This end of the timber will need to be square because it is what your saw is going to be riding against. So initially, from the 2 scraps of timber, you can see these 2 have got imperfections in them, so we're just going to remove those and that will give us the clean ends on the timber. So we're going to do that in the method we used last week by marking all the way around the timber from a face side face edge. And then we're going to put in a knife awl and we will cut these to the appropriate size. I'm just going to mark one of them just so you can see how it's done, just as a recap, but look back on the other video and you will see how that's done in more detail. So here I'm selecting a side to use as a face side and face edge. So we're just going to hold a steel rule against it, make sure we've got no bows in the middle of it or twists, and that's pretty much close for what we want. Being prepared, it should be fairly close and adequate for what we're going to actually be needing. So I'm going to select a side and put on our 2 marks, which are the face side and the face edge mark. So we're going to do the same again and put on our face side and our face edge mark. And those are the 2 sides that we're going to be using for referencing, like I said before, our gauge. So every side, again, can't stress that enough, they are the sides that you work from. Okay, so I'm going to come back from this edge, just a slight fraction, and I'm going to mark that down across there. And again, using the face side, face edge marks, we're going to pick up on our line and we're going to draw across there. We're going to do the same again. So the face side, face edge marks are being used all the time to reference our tri-square. Again, we'll turn that over and mark that in. We'll do both pieces of timber like that. Right, so we place our knife onto the line, bring our square up to it, again observing the face side, face edge marks as we did before. Keep that in nice and tight, and then we'll score our line across nice and deep. A couple of times through, and we'll go all the way round like that as we did in the measuring marking video. And we'll score our timber all the way round. Picking up our knife mark. And we'll turn that over and do the same on the back side of our block. Zip that straight across. Okay, so I know some of you guys might have problems actually cutting a knife wall dead straight, freehand. Obviously, if you've not done it before, it's going to take a bit of practice. So I'm just going to very quickly show you a slightly different method that you can use to aid that process. And for that, I'm going to use a chisel. Realistically, cutting a knife wall, you're cutting at 45 degrees back towards your initial knife wall line, and you're flicking that out just to form one straight wall and one angled wall. And this side is the side which is the piece of timber you're using. This is your waste side. So your waste side will always be the V, your good side will be the upright. Some people may struggle to cut that along there without practice, so we're going to take a chisel, and the other way we're going to do it is just going to very carefully just put a chisel on there. Start with one corner and just very carefully bring it around, just work it lightly until you come down, and you can flick that out like that. That'll flick out. Now if you use your knife, just very carefully against the knife wall, just lightly score it, and it'll take out any of the last fibres. And you can do that freehand because you've got that notch there to actually ride the knife into. So just very lightly along there, take that out, and there's your knife wall. What that'll allow for is for your sawtooth to sit into that groove and give you a line to cut to. It will keep your saw straight, or as reasonably straight as you can get it by following it carefully. It would also stop on your good part of the timber any tear out that you might find when you cut this line with the saw. So this eliminates the tear out. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to continue to cut the rest of those knife walls, which I'll do off camera, and then I'll show you the next stage. So this line here that we've marked and we've cut our knife wall in, it is quite important that you make sure that that is absolutely dead straight, all the corners meet, and then we can use that to support our saw, which we will do by dropping our saw into that cut. Now I know you're not going to get a perfect cut first time every time, but with a little bit of practice you'll do it. So allow yourself a little bit of extra timber, and then just do a couple of practice cuts, then mark your line and take your time when you're cutting. Some people hold the saw incorrectly by gripping it that way. It allows the saw to move either way. You will not get a straight cut. Point your finger along the saw. You don't need to grip it tight, just a light grip, and the only ones that you're really holding the saw with are those two. Okay, so you just keep a nice firm but light grip with your finger pointing forward, and you ensure that your arm is in line with the saw. So when you're sawing, you need to keep your arm perfectly in line with the saw. If your arm's to one side or the other, your saw cut will vary and it'll run off the line. So just as a pointer note, keep your arm perfectly in line, keep your finger pointed, and keep the grip firm but not too tight. Okay, so we're going to pick our line up with our thumb. We're going to insert the saw into the knife wall, and then just very, very lightly, we're not going to force it, we're just going to draw it a few times across just to start a very light cut. And we're just going to work away at that nice and slowly. Try and make sure your workpiece is clamped down quite tight, or whether you can get somebody to hold it for you while you cut it. And just gradually work away, nice and slowly, take your time. Now, when we actually get to a certain part of the cut, we're going to look and start following this line down. So we're going to be looking at this line and not the one on the top. And that will allow us to guide the saw down. Just by very lightly letting the saw cut itself down the line. Now when we get to the bottom of the saw cut, just slow up and just very carefully fire it off. So you're taking a very small chunk at a time. You've got a lovely square edge there. What we will probably need to do is to just very carefully, on that bottom edge, where the lip of the saw was, start that chisel. Just very carefully, very carefully, shave it up into the cut. Not heavily into the timber, just nice and lightly. Just take that off. That'll remove that edge, and then you can run that just over a small piece of sandpaper, just to take the edges off very lightly. You've then got a very square edge. So as you can see, when we put a square on it, we're nice and square across the top of our timber, and again that way. So that is a perfectly square cut, which is what we're looking for, and that is the edge that we're going to use as a reference for putting our saw against. So on the side where you've got your face side face edge, on that top corner we're going to put a cross on it, and that is going to be our end that we're going to use for our saw cut, our reference point. So our piece of timber that we had cut to start with, our 18mm MDF, is going to be our base board, and we are going to set the piece with the end that we had cut and marked with the X, we're going to use as our cutting guide, and that is going to be set parallel with the back, and if you are right-handed we're going to set it to the left. If you're left-handed and you use a saw in the left hand, turn that round and put it onto the right hand side. We're going to line that with a couple of clamps just to see the fit. So we're just going to pop a clamp on there for a minute, and that is what we're going to be looking for. A flush fit on the end and along the back. And our second piece, we can put central underneath. It doesn't really matter, about central is where we need to be, but we'll mark that and we'll do that piece after. This piece isn't as important. The important part that we need is this end, this cutting end. So we're going to pop that on there, so we get it almost in line, so nice and flush along the back there. Then we're going to take a pencil and we're just going to pop a line down there very quickly and to the end. So we're going to measure across it, which is 40mm. We're going to put a 20mm dot there, which is halfway. We're then going to adjust our gauge so that the pencil mark is on the end of the gauge. We're going to hold that down tight so we can set that to the 20mm line, like that. Just check that that's on our line. That's on our centre line, because we're looking at a centre line here for our drilling lines. So we need a centre line all the way down. So then we're going to turn our gauge round. We're going to set it on the edge of our timber, put our pencil on it, and we're just going to zip that down. That will give us a centre line down our two marks, the outer and the inner line. We're then going to measure off the length of that, which is, that one's 250, 260mm. So we're going to measure in approximately 40mm from either end. And then we're going to centre that. So we've got then three marks across that centre line, 40mm from either end and halfway along that line. What we're then going to do is we're going to drill some holes into that to take the screws. And if we don't drill the holes, what we're going to find is that it will try and push off the timber which is set at the back. So what we're going to do now is we're going to set up two sacrificial boards on the bench, and we're going to place the piece we're going to drill on top of one of those boards. Now, by drilling through one board into another, you're going to stop tear out on the back of this board where the hole will come through, and that will stop any damage on the back there. So we're going to take our drill with our 1/8" drill piece. We're going to line that up onto the first mark. We're going to hold that down I'm just going to very carefully drill a hole. Not forgetting to clear the hole as you drill. You can feel that pop through. And you've got a nice clean hole on the back there. And we're going to continue and do the same with the other two holes. Okay, so that's our 3 holes. Now we're going to change the drill bit. We're going to remove our 1/8 inch drill bit and we're going to insert the countersink bit. Just get that into the drill, get that a little tighten up. And we just very lightly on the back, the side that the timber's fitting to is the side we marked. We're going to turn that over and we're just very quickly, just on the back, just going to pop a countersink in there. We can then remove our sacrificial blocks and we can set up, remembering our cross, we can set that up onto our baseboard and we can drop on a couple of clamps. Just hold that in place, just stop it from moving. Make sure that that's level along this side. And then what we're going to do is we're going to turn that over. And then what we're going to do is we're going to drive the screws into that. You can put a little teeny drop of glue under it if you wish, and that will help hold it. So what we're going to do now is just going to drive some 3.5mm by 50mm screws into the board. So we've got a screwdriver bit in our drill, and just very slowly making sure that it all stays nicely in line. Slowly drive those in until they're sitting flush with the face of the board. And we'll do that for the other 2 screws as well. Just move the clamp back slightly, insert the other screw. And we can probably now take that clamp off, pop that over the edge of the bench, and then we can put some downward pressure on it. That's again pulled in flush. That's not going to move now. So we can go for our 3rd screw into that hole. And that's in there nice and tight. That now gives us our cutting edge, which is centered there. And we will now put the actual hook on the back of the board using exactly the same method. The hook for the back sits underneath and approximately halfway along from this point. So wherever this point meets, halfway along, so that we're looking about there. And that should work nicely. As you can see, we're now going to be dropping the remaining screws in the hook side, which we've fitted. So we're just propping that up on some timber, keep it nice and square. And we're just going to pop these screws in. And they will be the last 2 screws on that side. What we need to make sure now is that these screws are actually subsurface. They're just slightly below, so they're not going to catch on any timber or anything that you're going to put onto there. That really sums up the build for the bench hook. As you can see there, that is the layout, which is what we require. So now I will show you how to use the bench hook and how easy it will make things to cut for you. It's a useful piece of tool and we will be using it quite a lot in future videos that we do. So the method for using the bench hook is to start with our piece of timber, which as you can see there has got a knife all cut into it. Now what I've actually done is I've actually exaggerated the cut on the knife. Also, I don't know if you can see, this side is a our quality piece of timber, this side is our waste side, and the angles at which the knife will have been cut straight on the good side and angled in on the side of the waste. So now we can line the good side up with the block which we set on there, and we're going to just very carefully bring that into line. As you can see, the knife wall is lined up with the clean cut face that we trimmed with the square before. That's our finishing edge, and that is what the saw will sit up against. The saw will rest against there and into your cut. That will give us a nice clean cut. The bench hook can be fitted in one of two ways. It can either be fitted and hooked directly over the edge of your bench, and the pressure from your hand holding the timber in place will grip that and stop it sliding around or moving. The alternative method is to, if you have a vise, you can drop that into the vise, nip it up in the vise, and that is rock solid. It's not going to move, and then we set our timber onto that. The method I'm going to use, obviously for you guys that haven't got a vise available, is to just hook it over the edge of the bench, and you'll see how sturdy it is to make the cut on this board. As you can see, we've lined the cut line up with the end of our stop block. We're going to insert the saw, and that is touching against that. We're going to lower that in, and then we're just going to very carefully follow that down and make the cut. And when you remove that part, and as you can see, you've got a nice square, perfect straight cut. So that will work for any of your joints that you're going to be cutting, or if you're trimming to length. And the bonus side of this board being so long is that if you're cutting something that is a little bit longer, rather than with the shorter board, as you can see there, that you've only got a very short distance to support your timber, this has got a nice long length across it that will give you support on both sides of the cut. Well, that is the completion of our bench hook build. First project that we've done, which also serves as a tool that you're going to be able to keep and use, and it's going to aid in cutting for some of the joints that we'll be doing over the next few weeks. It's a good piece of kit. It's something that you'll need to use quite frequently. If you damage it, it's not a great problem. Rather than paying out a lot of money to go and buy one that's actually manufactured in maple or some other form of hardwood, this is by far your cheapest, cost-effective method that's available to you. It's not that hard to build. You might have to make it once or twice to get the feel of the cut. Obviously, some of you guys are not going to be spot on with your cutting, so you're going to have to be a little bit trial and error. You're going to practice, but it is good practice and worthwhile doing. So it's one of the tools that you've made yourself. Hopefully it will serve you well. So if you've enjoyed doing this little project, come and join us for the next one. Just a little bit of practice on some joints, or see what we can come up with. It's just about practicing. It's about enjoying what you're doing, taking your time. There's no great rush to complete these projects. If it takes you a week to build this, it takes you a week. If you've enjoyed what you've seen, like, subscribe, and we'll see if we can get another nice little project going for you for next week. So we'll see you all soon. Thanks for joining us.